Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kamwe Ajay Brinya. We have a really cool and exciting update. I did not see this before we filmed last time
I
in
think
regards
we
to
filmed. I don't think it was up by the time we filmed Blue Side 2 because we posted that really early.
we filmed it early. But this was from the organizer and the Mohammed's, like we've
Family.
talked about
Yes.
last year. But
Oh, fuck.
he said, "The words I write here will never be enough to truly thank you for your incredible generosity and humanity. Without your support, we could not have achieved what once seemed impossible during the war. Thanks to your kindness, my sisters Shahid and Rihan are now safely in Qatar, and Hana has reached Algeria. They are finally in safe places where they can begin the journey of healing and rebuilding their lives. Your contributions have covered their travel, medical care, and basic needs, and for this, we are eternally grateful." So that was a really good, happy note. So I don't know what's going to happen moving forward. I'm sure we're going to have other mutual aid that we're just going to link in the description of each episode. And if we have anything specifically, we'll probably use the time in the beginning of each episode to give like a little bit of spotlight for whichever one. I know we each have our own like specific mutual aid groups local to us that we will probably be plugging in. Like if it gets really cold or really hot here, I'll probably throw in mine. And then I know Kristen was talking about how there's floods in Kentucky right now, so I think that's the one that's going to go in the description of this. So check that
Yes.
out if you want to see what we're advocating for. But it's just a little different. I'm just happy that they were able to get out, but I wanted to provide an update. So for more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host, Mariah. You can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms. Okay. So this...
So,
Oh.
I don't know. How do we want to
Well,
frame
because
it?
I
This
was
was
just
our
going to...
second book club book.
Yes, that's what I was going to mention first. So if you are not a part of the Fable book club, we do have this linked in the description below to join, or you can go on the Fable app and look up LitLibPod, and we will be announcing our next book later this week on the actual book club. Well, whatever we ended up voting on, because I think we did a poll for it, and I don't know what the results are of the poll yet. But we did this with our book club. I think it was about as active as The Dispossessed was, I would say. You did not come through at all.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I don't know why it's not picking up. Of course
Okay, you're good now.
Of course it's not.
It's good now.
Um I think it's been about the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Yes. So if you want to join the podcast and get our opinions, I was a lot more active in this one than I was with The Dispossessed, because I did end up enjoying Chain Gang All Stars significantly more than I enjoyed The Dispossessed. So I was like, I think I ended up being one of the first people in the book club to finish it, because the ending I kind of ended up plowing through, I think. Like, I read the last 100 pages.
The ending moves really quick, which was nice. It's a very it's a different book. So if you don't know what this is about, it's about, I don't know how to describe, like I have the
Like,
summary in front of me, but I feel like it gives away so much, but it's essentially like if we lived in a dystopian
future.
world.
It's a future for sure, because they have...
It could be a near future where prisoners had the opportunity to earn their freedom by participating in these gladiator style fights, so they could do away with their sentences. This story follows two of the top women primarily, and it also just explores the general like political landscape of the time. It's not...
It's very...
the perspectives are very different because you're getting so many different perspectives. So it's like a third person.
But there is first person sometimes, too.
Yes, there's sometimes first. It's a very unique. It's very
Yeah.
hard to like talk about this book because
It is
of
so
the way
unique,
it's
yeah.
structured.
Yeah.
And it is arguably one of the most informational fictional reads that we have read. This is one of those books that,
Yes.
like, if you've been trying to get somebody on board to read, like, nonfiction about prison abolition or just, like, a general, like, crit to get people to understand the disparities of the prison system, like, this would be solid because a lot of it is rooted in reality,
Mhm.
which I really appreciated, so it's a very interesting book. If you've never heard of it, go in as blind as you possibly could, but I feel like if you're a fan of Dead Man Wonderland or what was the other one? It's kind of like Squid Game too. Like it's just that general vibe, not exactly a one to one, but set in like America and a lot more
I would say
rooted in reality.
it's also similar to Babel while not being like a historical fantasy, where in the way that I felt like Babel ended up teaching us a lot about the opium crisis in China and like how England and colonization caused that and were direct leading causes of that, where this is almost similar to like talking about prisons within the United States and prison abolition. This is like similar in that way.
Yes, but I feel like the narr or that because there's like footnotes that
Yes.
you reference, so it feels almost academic, but also the footnotes almost added an additional like narrative lens, like you're watching this, and it's like meta
Yeah.
in a sense, like the way it's like talking to you and explaining these things, but it doesn't feel pretentious. I'm sure for some people it probably did if you already knew everything, but I thought it was a very unique, like artistic choice for
Mhm.
an author that we just don't see very often, and I'm a footnotes girly,
Yeah.
so I ate it up.
Yeah, I thought it was very good too because even though like obviously like I feel like me and you are obviously we're prison abolitionists, so we already have like that framework for a lot of the stuff and there were still like certain people that were specifically talked about in the footnotes of this that I had not like heard of specifically that were still like brought up within the footnotes too, you know?
Yeah, there was I
Like
think
there's still
anyone can extract anything from this, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I do think this is like again, like if this is somebody that I think if this is a person that usually reads nonfiction, they can read this and enjoy it as fiction. Or if you're the opposite, if you're wanting to get more into nonfiction, you can use this as like a stepping stone in that way as well. But I guess talking about Nana Kwame Ajay Brinya, again, me and Mariah looked up how to say his name, and I'm going to apologize. I'm working my best to say it, and if it's wrong, you can bully me. But he's from Spring Valley, New York, and he talked about growing up. I watched a video that he did with I think it was Penguin Classics and he kind of talked about like why he wrote the book and like what he believed in and stuff like that. And I'm going to link that. I guess Mariah's uploading this, so Mariah is going to link that video in the description, and then also an essay that he wrote called "Why Do You Write Political Stories?" And I think both of those are very informative, and I'm sure we'll end up talking a little bit about them. But to get like his full scope of things, I think both of these are very much a necessity because he does end up talking about how he thought he was originally a prison abolitionist, but he didn't have any like research or framework about it. So whenever he began writing this book, it like cemented in that idea that yes, he is a prison abolitionist, which is
Really cool.
yeah. And then he talks in the essay and stuff about like why he writes political stories and stuff, which I didn't see anything like whether or not he's like a Marxist Leninist or anything like that, but it does seem that he is very anti-capitalist, at least. In what ways I don't know exactly, because he does critique capitalism throughout Changing All Star, and then his other work is supposed to also critique capitalism and then also like American white supremacy and things of that nature, and like just general oppression. So he is definitely like obviously we hate the term leftist, but if you don't know somebody's like intent, I would say he's definitely at least anti-capitalist.
I feel like and I've talked to other people, like, in the nonfiction, like, book fear about this phenomenon. Like, anyone that reads a lot of history, a lot of, I don't know, like, theory in regards to, like, these types of ideas, they generally end up going left wing, like,
Mhm.
economically. At bare minimum, they're gonna be, like, some sort of, like, Dem sock, but for them like, you see the structures, like, these it's very apparent. Maybe not everyone is a Marxist, but it's very common that as soon as you start really studying history that has been, like, whitewashed
Mhm.
or done through, like, a colonial lens, I feel like it's just, it's I sup I don't know, I don't know how to explain it, like, it's a thing.
Well, I
So,
think
like,
it's
people just tend to lean left when you start to learn more about the reality of the world.
and when we say lean left, we mean actually lean left, by the way, not like
Not in terms of US politics, I'm
no,
talking,
like
like, genuinely, like,
actually like
left-wing economic
yeah.
policies.
Where I don't really know, like he doesn't really talk about that. And the two things that I sort of ended up watching the video and then I read that essay, which I thought was again a really profound essay, which he ends up talking about like because people are always like, oh, like why do you write political works? And then he ends up talking about how like basically like being an author and like art and things are typically political and things like that, which are like again things that me and Mariah have always discussed and we always talk about in every single one of our podcast episodes about how like all of these things, why they might not feel political, they are inherently political, and he ends up like talking about that. So I do really think if you want to see more in depth, like talks about some of his inspirations and stuff like that, I do really think it's a good essay that he wrote that will be linked in the description. That should definitely be checked out and read.
I was also, suggested to read Black Friday, I think is his
Yes.
other book,
Yeah, I
which
had
is
that on
like
my list to
a
read.
anthology or
Yeah,
something,
sure. It's
like, I
a
don't think it's a
couple.
proper.
I know it's supposed to be a couple of short stories. I think like four-ish, maybe. And I know that's supposed to critique capitalism as well, at least some of the stories. I don't know exactly what I wanted to go into. I mean, me and Mariah typically try to go into as blind as possible into most books. So I didn't read too much about it, but like while after I finished reading this, I was like, okay, what else has he written? It's being added to my TBR immediately. And I think this and then Black Friday are like the only things that have been traditionally published by him.
Pretty cool.
So
Um, else? What's next on the list?
controversies, not I didn't see any, which
I would be I mean, the only controversy I can imagine anytime we read these books, whenever I look up controversy for the authors, it's always just like
white people.
white, like, quote unquote middle class people like crying and be like, it's just white racism. So anymore, I'm like,
I didn't
what
even see
controversy can there be?
that actually really either. And I mean, I didn't read that many one-star reviews. I'm not like Mariah where I would go into like the one-star reviews. I mean, I looked up his name and then controversy, nothing really popped up. And then the one-star reviews really wasn't even people complaining about the content necessarily of the book. They just said it was predictable, which I'm like, I don't really know if it's necessarily predictable. They compared it to like The Handmaid's Tale and things like that, which on the back of the book it literally has a blurb comparing it to The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. So it's like, wow, dystopian fiction is like other dystopian fictions. What? um
I think what's so confusing is this was like rooted in something that makes sense and it's just the idea of like it's not like torture porn or
no, like
like
it's based in
glorifying
reality.
violence. It's very much based in reality. If you keep up with like the news, you know that like these things really do happen. And based on the footnotes, all of this is rooted and based on real events,
Mhm.
which so like
I
what do
don't
you mean?
I don't know. Well, because like the blurb on the back saying that it's like 1984 and like The Handmaid's Tale, I'm like, how dare you compare those garbage ass books to this masterpiece? Anyways, and I guess if it's not obvious, me and Mariah do strongly recommend this. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars.
I also gave it we were pretty much on the same page about this, but I think the reason we didn't give it a perfect 5 star, I can make a guess. It's just the way that the story is structured. It can be a little confusing, and there is
Yes.
like a slog in the middle of the book,
Mm-hmm.
which was very hard to get through. We're filming this technically the day before it's coming out. So it was kind of hard to get through part of it. The very like beginning and the end were very strong, but the middle was kind of tiresome. But
It's well
that could
worth it
just be
though.
like our our preference in books. I just wish it was a little bit more character focused,
Because
just for myself personally.
well, because like whenever you do like in the middle, you're not focusing on the main characters of the story either. I feel like you kind of get introduced to new characters and like things going on more in the world than you are following the two main characters. So I mean, it's not like I necessarily have a problem with that. I do feel like it would just like I don't know how to word it. I do think the writing style was very like you do have to get used to it at first because you are jumping around to where it'll be third person and then like almost like second person, but not quite because it's almost like they are talking to the audience specifically. And then there's also like a first person perspective character. And then so it's like a lot kind of all at once, especially I don't typically read books that jump from perspective like that. Typically they're third person or they're first person. So it is a little bit confusing. But I think you can easily get over that. Like once you get into you're into it. And I do appreciate how educational it was. I mean, with the Goodreads popularity, 70K ratings, 12K reviews, averaging 4.13 stars, it's got great reviews. You don't need us to tell you that.
It kind of reminds me of the structure of House of Leaves, but just written differently. So
Oh, you're
instead of it
cutting
being
out.
reading it, oh no,
Hold on. Okay,
I don't
you're
know where I was.
lagging. You're lagging. House of Leaves.
It reminds me of House of Leaves in the sense of, like, you're jumping around to so many different point of views, and sometimes it's more like an academic piece of work, but then you're getting, like, different narrations of, like, first person or third person or, like, second person. So it's, like, interesting in that sense, but I've never read another book that has something even remotely similar, so I thought that was cool, but it is confusing because I don't have, like, it's written like a traditional novel.
Mhm. Like, whenever
I know how
it
to explain. If you've
changes
read House of Leaves, like, it's different.
well, because, like, the way that the chapters are, like, there's the chapters all have titles, but, like, whenever you're getting a title, there's nothing that's saying that, like, what perspective it's gonna be, you kind of have to, like, start reading it to figure it out. So then you could be, like, 2 or 3 paragraphs in before you're like, "Oh, I'm following this first person perspective character rather than this third person perspective character that you've been following for, like, so many chapters or whatever." Because it is too, or
And
it could be like 2 or 3 chapters where you're following like the third person perspective and then one chapter of the first person, or then you're following like 2 or 3 chapters where you're in a completely different part of the world and things, which is it is a lot, especially if you're not used to reading. I think if you're not like you really have to be like a seasoned reader too, I think. Like this can't just
yeah,
be
this is, like, something I would recommend to people who read a lot of nonfiction to read fiction, whereas this is something I wouldn't necessarily read or, like, recommend to somebody who's just, like, I don't know, like, getting back into reading.
yeah, like
I wouldn't recommend this because it's not super light, it's very heavy,
mhm.
it's a rather challenging read, but I appreciated that, so it's
Yeah.
I don't know, I can understand some, but, like, a one-star review for it? No.
No.
I don't think so.
Anyways, other than that, um
Are we going
I
into the
s
spoiler
yeah,
zone?
I would say specifically now, if you haven't read this book, go pick it up. Definitely read it, especially if you are on the left in any type of way, if you enjoy mine and Mariah's content in any way, like if you are a Marxist, if you are on the left, if you're a prison abolitionist, go ahead and read this. And even if you're somebody who's like, I don't believe in prison abolition because what are we going to do with all the criminals? Then you definitely need to read this.
Yeah, I would say that.
um, so
This was very timely though because I did post a video on TikTok as of lately, like try to reframe the conversation around like liberals and the way that they're treating like left wing people or anyone that's like standing in opposition to the status quo and they have this like punitive justice mindset and try to explain that to people and then be like, actually
actually,
you're a rapist apologist. And I was like, "Oh,
what?
so this was really nice to read in the context of everything happening." Because I was like, "Wow,"
Yeah.
because this story does follow a lot of characters that have done really problematic and harmful things.
Mhm.
And I thought that was such a interesting thing because we read Notes on an Execution, which is like similar vibes, right? But that one's more so just critiquing the the death penalty and
Well,
its
this does
process.
do that as well, but this is, like, in a more
It's
fictional
like
setting,
different.
yeah.
Where like this, I just feel like it does such a good job of explaining that despite the wrongs you do in society, it kind of shows how the utility of the prison like industrial complex is for profits
Mhm.
and the way
Yes.
it's used in like a creative sense,
Like
while also showing like the meat packing
yeah.
or whatever
The
industries that people work in.
sponsorship, like, where they have to get, like, tattoos or, like, they wear
Trademarks.
yeah, like or they wear, like, the specific logos, I was just like, "I can see this." Like, literally in, like, 20 years, I would not be surprised if we don't have something like that where it's, like maybe it's not as extreme as, like, gladiatorial combat, but it'll be, like, somebody like, some crazy, like, trial or something, and then, like, corporate starts sponsoring trials or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like I could see that realistically within the United States. Like that is not something that's completely unrealistic. Obviously, I think like the gladiator aspect is probably something that would not necessarily I mean, hopefully, I mean, Jesus Christ, with the rate we're going, who knows, but you know,
That's the thing. I was like everything feels so like dystopian with everything that's going on. It's like anything is possible.
yeah,
Anything is possible. I wouldn't put it past them to have even like at a bare minimum, I can see prison uniforms starting to get like trademarks
yeah.
or something
Or be like
for people
made
that
to
are
you
working because
made
they're
by.
like, "Oh, look at these like sweat factories that people are working in and look at the back of their shirt." It's like Coca-Cola or
Yeah.
something.
Like I could
I can
definitely
see it. I
yeah. And I think like this is such a great commentary on it too because I had just finished reading Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis, which is like a great nonfiction to pair with this if you haven't read like any nonfiction related to prison abolition. But like reading this and like listening to like Our Prison's Obsolete again are just like I feel like that, like, it's like you always think, like, whenever you're, like, a Marxist or whatever, like, without having, like, the educational background, you're like, "Oh, yeah, like, I'm a prison abolition," where people don't even discuss what prison abolition really is, where it's not just, "We're getting rid of prisons and everyone's just free to roam on the streets." It's putting that money that is put into the prison industrial complex and put into prisons, putting that into other communities and putting that back into communities, into schooling, into mental health facilities, into things like that are actually like helping people specifically so that they're not on this prison pipeline. And it like one of the characters, Mari, in this, she does a great job at like trying to explain that to obviously like a very distressed person that had to deal with like one of their family members being killed, who's just like very much one track mind, where it's like you don't look at like why these things have happened. Like why if we have such a strong justice system where we're imprisoning more people than anyone else in the world per capita, why do these crimes keep happening? It's so obvious that prison is not deterring any type of crime. So why do we keep funding something like this rather than putting that money towards stuff that is shown to actually stop crime, which is like education and things like that?
That's what, like, people don't get, and they'll always bring up, like, "Well, what about the rapist?" Which I'm so happy that that anarchist, collective called their zine/pamphlet that because it comes up so frequently.
Yes.
Everyone always asks about that. I was like, "1, we have to acknowledge that, like, sexual assault, as it exists right now, is the most underreported violent crime, and also it's,
Hmm.
like, one of the most undertried. It is very difficult to get across. So it's like, 1,
They're
it's
not
not
even
doing
going to
anything right
jail.
now. They're not going to jail, so it's like, okay, so what's them
So what's your
going to
idea?
jail now gonna do?
Yeah.
And then, like, if you bring up, like, the history of, like, the myth of the black rapist, which was brought up in Angela Davis's Woman Racing Class, and, like, we look at it as, like, a holistic view because we can acknowledge that, like, these are bad, harmful things that happen, but we have to look at, like, what are the material conditions that are causing it. This pertains to every single crime. I
Yes.
don't care what it is, you have to look at all of it.
Hmm.
And they don't wanna do that, and I don't know if it's because it's difficult work, because they think that you're being empathetic towards them, but it's, like, not you can hold people accountability or accountable and understand like, the factors that, like, exist, like, a cis heteropatriarchal ideology is, like, what is allowing people or telling them that they can like do these harmful things.
And what
So
people
if that's gonna get exist, like you have to combat the root of the disease to eradicate the problem.
and even what people think, they think that like a rapist deserves or a murderer deserves the worst thing in the world. You look at our prison system, most people are in prison for drug related crimes. So if you're holding someone that like to that same caliber where you're like, "Oh, well these people are like the worst of the worst, the scum of the earth," where if most of the people are in prison for drug related crimes, why do you think they should suffer just as badly if they're not even the worst of the worst people? You know?
But they
They
don't
don't
wanna look into,
think
like,
about it.
school to prison pipeline or
No.
anything, and it's frustrating
It's
because
like
it feels like you're just, like, hitting your head against the wall.
people don't look at
It's
like
like
how poverty is connected to prisons and things like that. Where it's like if we put funding, you can see like I know Angela Davis talked about it in Our Prison's Obsolete and stuff like that, where you can see like a lot of the time too, people that are in prison, whenever they get out, they end up going back to prison because again, there's no social safety nets to help these people once they have served their time to do better. But then the ones that had like the people that end up not going back to prison are the people that had like college education chances in the prisons or like different things like that within their prisons that help them actually educate and learn and do these other things. But they want to keep making things like that unaccessible to the regular man. And so it's going to keep funding the United States having this slave labor because that is what prisons are for, is for slave labor here in America.
It's like, I don't know if I know your mom and my mom, they do a lot of the similar things. So they watch like the true crime,
Yes.
right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure your mom also watches like the prisons around the world. There's no way she doesn't because it's just like if you watch true crime, you probably watch like the random like prison videos. But there was one on I can't remember like Discovery or something talking about like the Nordic countries and how their system like each person gets like their own dorm and
Hmm.
they're like I can't remember which Nordic country it is.
I know what you're
They
talking.
get like
I've
their own
seen that.
dorm. They have clothes that are not just like incriminating clothes, like they're treated with respect and dignity. They have classes that translate to jobs. They'll help them get jobs after they can transition out. And the re incarceration rate is like 10%. Like it's significantly lower than in the United States. And it's like this is just like a bare minimum thing that we absolutely could afford in the United States, but it's not profitable.
No, because they need
So
to
it
keep
will
people in
not
prison.
invest in this,
And I wonder
right?
if with like Donald Trump being a convicted felon, because like I don't care what any right winger wants to have to say, I feel like this is not even the problem is with like Donald Trump and like his idea too is that like the people that are like liberals and stuff like that, they're not going to continue having like a moving on to transformative justice, right? They see that and they're like, "Oh, well, actually, this guy's a criminal, so he's bad." Blah blah blah. Which like Donald Trump is bad from other things, not just because he's a convicted felon, sort of thing. And rather than like using it as like a critique for the prison system, they're using it as like the rule of the prison system. Does that make sense? I don't know how to word it.
You mean like they wanna keep it because they're like Trump for prison instead of
Yes.
like Trump for president, like type vibe?
Yeah, where it's like rather than them viewing it as like prison is not even viewed as like a rehabilitation center, even though that's supposed to be the whole point of it, right?
No, because in like our society, we are taught it is punishment
Yeah.
exclusive. Like you're being punished for the bad thing that you caught. And I like part of it does I gotta walk very carefully because I know there has been some quote unquote leftists that have been using this type of language. So I'm gonna be very intentional here. But it does seem back to like a white Christian evangelical outlook of this binary of good versus evil, which isn't necessarily unique to like Christian ideology, but also just general like colonialism, just like the good people and the bad people, the enlightened versus like the I don't know, I don't even know what you'd call it, like the wretched of the earth, as Fanon would have said. But it's like this false dichotomy or binary that people have in their head and they haven't actually worked through it to understand that there's like shades of gray here. So it's not like all bad people are going to prison. Like if you go to prison, if you're a felon, you're not that does not automatically make you a bad person.
And that's
And it
what
goes back to like the drug charges. Like
yeah.
if you have an ounce of weed on you and you're a felon, you
Yeah.
can't vote, you can't get a gun, and sometimes you can't leave the state.
Yeah.
So it's like
And that's why I think it was really important too because in Chain Gang All Stars there was that character, Badwater specifically, who was actually innocent, even though he was like tried for murder and he was found guilty. And the reason why he joined the CAPE program, which is what it's called throughout the book, like the gladiatorial thing, he joined that because he didn't want to have to serve time for a crime he never committed. And so, at least with this, it gave him a chance to get out in a much shorter time than what it would have been. Because I think in the video, I don't know, I don't remember it specifically mentioning in the book, but I know in the video, the author mentions that it was people that have to serve 25 years or more is how you get basically offered for the CAPE program. So he was either gonna, so
Just
you get
kind
that
of
option of spending 25 years or 3 really hard fucking years, and you might not even survive, but 25 years is a good chunk of your life. If you live to be 100, that's a quarter of your life. And most people don't live into a to 100, especially in the United States.
It reminds me of, like, people that take plea deals
Mhm.
because either they're being misinformed or they have bad attorneys or, like, the way the system is set up, that's gonna be the best outcome that they get, and it's so crazy, like, even as a kid, I remember watching, like, these crime videos, and they're taking this plea deal even though
They're
they're not
innocent,
guilty, and I
yeah.
was like, they're I was like, "They're innocent," but,
Well, because, like,
like, strategically, it's like a strategy, but then in the eyes of society, because you've admitted to being guilty, you are therefore, like, bad or tarnished,
and
no
then
longer pure.
and that's one thing too, like, where this mentions, like, about, like, it's, like, so like, up to, like, 5% of people, especially on death row, end up being actually innocent as well. And so it's like, even if it was 99.9% accurate, there's still a 0.1% chance, and I could not, like, in good conscience, I don't know how you could sit there in good conscience and just be like, "Well, that means everyone deserves to die," where you're supposed to
It's just
be.
such a strange outlook that people have, they're just like, "No, it's fine, it's just, like, they're a casualty." I was like, "But what if that was you?"
Yeah, or your friend, or your family, or your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. These people have no empathy, and that's the thing, is that these people are like, "I'm empathetic, except blah, 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 A, B, C, and D," sort of reasons, where it's like, "Okay, so you're not actually an empathetic person. You're not an empath."
Liberalism and its consequences.
Yeah. Um, I feel like we haven't really talked about the book that much. When Randy Mack
No, but
died.
it all pertains to, like, the
Yes.
story, like, we see so many different things, and the way the structure is, like, we have, like, this really nice, like, queer love interest, and then you're also seeing, like, this, like, white liberal woman and her, like, Trumper
Republican
husband
boyfriend,
that's super
husband, yeah.
into, like, the fights, and then you also have, like, another one who's, like, a child of, somebody on, like, the CAPE program, so it's, like, equivalent to, like, a child of somebody on, like, death row and, like, the type of
Mhm.
treatment that you receive in society. Like, there's so many different layers to this. It's very hard to, like, completely take it. So we're just taking, like, a very holistic view of the themes and
Well,
chatting
because I
because
think what this book does a really good job at too, like, I think, like, even Mari's character is such a very, like, all the characters are obviously very complex in their own ways, but I really like the way that Mari's character is I don't even know how to describe it, because there's, like, this scene where she's talking about whenever her father, Sunset, died, and she was like, she didn't even know she wanted him to reach High Freed either because of what he had did. And I think that really does show, like, the complex feelings that you can have about, like, prison abolition and how you view these people that do commit heinous crimes, you know?
about and, like, the more I read about, like, transformative justice and the nuances of it is obviously a lot of people have a lot of emotions, especially if it's somebody that's, like, close to you that gets harmed, right? But it's, like, prioritizing the people who have been harmed first and then addressing the the people who are doing harms or the doing instigating, I guess would be the better term, instigating the harm afterwards. Like, you have to prioritize and uplift the people who have experienced, like, bad things, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that we're gonna completely ignore and do away with the people that did the bad things. Because we
Yes.
want them to change. You want them to change so that they can continue in society and understand, like, these things are wrong.
And so that it doesn't happen
You can't
again.
do that.
Like, the
Exactly.
you put these people into these situations that continuates putting violence upon them and harm upon them, where we've seen, like, historically and, like, statistically, it shows that, like, people that are harmed continue to do harm. You have to stop that cycle, like, objectively, like, you have to stop that cycle if you want it to stop. And y'all
I felt like, we talked about this a little bit in The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison about how because it's a very if you haven't read it, we don't wanna, like, provide too many spoilers, but it does assess, like, how systems of harm, like a white supremacist ideology, like, permeates deeply into different people in society, especially people who are in the South in like the 1940s, how they could be perpetuating that harm onto like their own children and how they're also victims of harm. So it's like, do you punish somebody for doing the harm or do you look at like where they came from and see like, okay, these are the factors that caused it. So how can we help the person that had the harm and then also help the person that is doing the harm because clearly something bad happened to them?
yeah.
Like these things aren't happening in a vacuum. I think people watch too much like true crime, Criminal Minds, and they just think that one day that somebody just went off their rocker and decided to
Which I'm sure
do
that
bad
does
things.
happen sometimes, but then obviously that person has some type of, like, mental health crisis too. Because, one thing too, like, majority of people in prison have mental health issues and things like that, and instead of combating those and doing things and, like, trying to help these people that are in mental health crises, we send them to prison to do slave labor for corporations in America. Like, this is not how you fix these things at all. And the fact is that, like, you could be like, "Oh, yes, it's wrong. That's why you're for prison reform." And then you look at, like, what prison reform is, where it's like you're upholding these same methods of harm. Because I don't even know what people, like, in prison reform think, like, that they would do.
Oh, that's what I always wonder as well is people that are strictly like,
Reformist.
um, defund the police or reform the prison. Like they're just like the reformist. Like I don't know if it's just like an immediate material reality they're looking for changes and they're only focused within like those 4-year like typical like liberal
Mhm.
frameworks like every 4 years we're going to reassess this in like 4 years, which I mean is fine, but don't you want to look to like the
Like,
future
your
beyond those 4
children, your
years and see like
grandchildren, the people that are going to exist outside of us. And it's again I think it again goes back to, like, these people aren't actually empathetic. They want themselves to feel better. They care about me, myself, and I, not other
yeah,
people.
like it's like lip service.
Where it's like, yeah, I can acknowledge that they do wrong, but I won't explain how they can do better either. It's like, okay, so we're just sitting here doing nothing then, I guess.
They basically just take what they like from, like, revolutionary movements and disregard the
And water
rest.
it
Who's like, "Well,
down.
I like the idea of defunding the police and having more people do outreach for, like, people having mental health crises," because that's often, like, people that end up getting, like, shot and killed by police when they have, like, the welfare like, checks and shit.
Mhm.
But that's not I was like, "Well, why is this person having a crisis in their home in the first place?"
Yeah. And why is the only option that they have to call the police?
And then we're like, "Okay, well, maybe, like, universal healthcare."
Yeah. Like, that's just, like,
We
one
a
step.
holistic,
Yeah.
universal healthcare where everyone can get, like, mental health care, and they're like, "I don't know, do we have the tax money? What about the military? Gotta fund the genocide against Palestinians."
Yeah.
It's just it's exhausting. It's been a long couple of weeks, especially, like, this
The
is all
liberals are
happening.
going crazy right now. Yeah, you guys are getting what you deserve, don't you worry. Especially you leftists, because you guys didn't vote for Kamala.
It's so weird that people are maintaining that
Well, because
mindset.
they act like too if
I
she was
just
in
don't get it.
power right now, like the difference right now, or it's like you guys still wouldn't be doing anything. You'd be like, well, we have to do this because or else Trump would have won.
Oh my god, did you see that? There was a highlight in this book. It's so funny that you said that because there was the lady where she was like,
Oh
"I
yeah,
didn't even vote
vote
for
for
that person." And I
yeah,
was like, "Wow." She hadn't even voted for Robert Birchard, the president who had paved the way for the hard action sports, and she believed that it was no accident that people of color and particularly people from the African diaspora made up so many of the characters on this show. She knew that black people and other minorities were disproportionately in prison. So, like, it has, like, this double insinuation that, like, had it been the other person, that maybe it would have been it's like, that was really clever. That was a good
Yes.
one, and that was a good segue.
I know, well, because I mentioned that too in the book club chat specifically, because I was like, talking about how liberals keep perpetuating harm, where they don't realize that they do, and they don't have any actual self-reflection, and I don't even know, like, because, like, the thing is that, like, the people that need to read this won't read this.
No, and
Or if
it's
they
I don't
do
know.
read it, they're not gonna get it. They're gonna be
And
like,
this is
"Wow, this
not like a book
sucks."
that you can, like, rug pull them on, like, try to
No.
trick them into reading it, like,
Like,
"Aha,
I
got you,"
feel
because, like, I would never do that, because then they would hate it, and they'd, like, review bond and be like, "I can't believe you would recommend this."
yeah,
But it's just so good, and there's so many layers, like, I don't know if you saw my comment even about, who was this? Simon Kraft, where he said,
oh.
"I am Job. No, Job pities me. I live beneath the fist of God." And I was like, "Oh my god," like, that's such a good line because Job was, like, God's favorite, so Satan was like, you favorite him." So God was like, "Actually, if you can test him, you can do whatever you want to him, but don't hurt him." So then Satan, like, goes and, like, kills his whole family and shit and, like, kills off all his animals, and God's just like, "Yeah, I was testing you, and he's still faithful to me." Like, it's very, like, interesting.
But I don't know
Is it
anything about religion, so
I know you didn't see that, but, like, there's just so many, like, layers to this
this is
story
a really,
and
like,
all the
complex. Like, I wish, like, I want Tyler to read this, but I don't know if he would like it either. But I do think because it almost is also like a commentary on like spectator sports and things like that. Because like in the NFL, and then like I don't know the exact like what's the word?
was a big thing is, like, the gambling and, like, the hard action sport
Yeah,
aspect of it. I do think
like
you
with
could
the
get
NFL, like
men to
majority
read
of
this.
the players in the NFL are black men. Like I don't know. That's what I was saying. But it almost reminds me like the way that it's written is almost like a more MMA, UFC sort of thing. But I don't know like what the because that's almost like worldwide more than like American football is just like here. But like I feel like it almost is also a commentary on that too because like those are entertainment to specifically like white people and stuff, and especially like with the Super Bowl just happening, and then like all of the white people are like complaining about Kendrick Lamar's performance and stuff. They're like who listens to this trash, blah blah blah. Where it's like, okay, so you're going to sit here and not like the halftime performance being a black man and calling it like a DEI halftime performance, where it's like, I'm not even kidding. This has like been the discourse. And then also watch a sport and enjoy a sport that is putting black men in harm's way specifically because we know how traumatic football is on a person and their brain.
You know what? That I think it's is it Parenti? Maybe Parenti said something about this in one of his books where he's talking about how, God, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about how, like, action like, sports like NFL and whatnot are, like, pictured as being, like, good, but in reality, like, it's your quality of life long term, if you do contact sports like that, significantly depreciates if you get, like, concussed multiple times.
Oh my god.
Anything can happen
I mean,
on the field or even in these, like, MMA sports. Like, I see people sometimes, like, the clips I don't watch MMA, but, like, it's bad is when it's getting on, like, my little, like, the
yeah.
gay For You page. Like, I'm getting my Pink Pony Club edits, and then I'm seeing an MMA event. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Wow." But they're doing it to, like, get money, and they do tend to get a lot of money, but they're
But
still
it's
being
not worth
exploited.
it. Yeah. It's still exploitation because like well, at least like with UFC, I only know this because my partner watches UFC. They do like pay-per-views like a couple times a month, and those could be upwards of $90 per screen that you're putting it on. And that's just like and they get hundreds of millions of views on these things. And so like there's and I know like the fighters, like even the main event fighters are not making that much money for however many views there are. Like
I wonder what their tax status is, if they are considered, like, independent contractors that go through it, and then
I'm
do
not
they get, like,
sure, but I know
401(c) or whatever? Like, do
well,
they have, like, a
I
What does their, retirement look like? Do these companies like UFC, like the main brand UFC, do they, like, put money into, like, a pension for them? What happens?
I think, like, typically how it is they get, like, a base pay for, like, accepting a fight and, like, being, like, the event or whatever, like, being on the card or whatever, they get, like, a pay. And then they get paid out
Mm.
differently whether or not they win or they lose. So, like, if you win, you get more money, if you lose, you get less money. But then these people are still like whatever it is, it's they also have to end up splitting it up for like their coach and their team because like they have gyms and stuff that they pay for, where they have to pay like yearly, monthly memberships or whatever, where they practice and like spar and whatever. And then they have like their coaches that are training them specifically. And all of that is from like whatever they end up winning. And I think it doesn't end up being like from my understanding, it's not like it's a lot of money, like, compared to, like, us poor people, but, like, even for, like, what they do, it's not, like, a lot because a lot of the time, these, like, fighters, like, the GOATs, are still, like, doing multiple fights a year just to make, like, probably maybe a couple million as their own,
Which seems like a lot of money,
which
but
seems like a lot of
when
money, but,
you have
like
to take that over a course of, like, your lifetime, and when you get older, you need I don't even remember how much it is to retire. I think it's like 2,000,000 right now
yeah,
to retire because you have to be able to pay for all of, like, your
the
medication stuff. So this
housing,
is, like, the
yeah.
kind of stuff I look at. I was like, "Okay, they're 25, they're retiring by 30. You still have, like, 30 years
So their
left. You have,
retirement
like,
needs to be
30 years
higher
left." So, like,
than what, like, the
I
average
would think that
retirement
they're
too.
maybe they would, like, unionize in some way
I
so that
don't
they
know,
can get
yeah.
more, like because it reminds me of, like, the Chapel Roan mentioned 2 times, where sh in her speech, she was talking about how, like, there was no protections for young artists, and I
Yeah,
wonder
with
if
healthcare.
they're treated the same way because
I
they
mean, I
should
would
have
assume so. From, like, my understanding, it's like, yes, they make a lot of money, but, like, it's odd like, not a lot of money goes to the individual fighter either because it ends up getting split up between, like, their management and, like, all these other branches. I obviously don't know the ins and outs or the politics of any of this, blah, 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 and I'm sure a lot of the times I know whenever they retire, they can become, like, commentators or whatever, and then they have a career that way, whatever. Like, I get it, but we're talking, like I know it's not
trying to make
this.
the connections based on what we know, and maybe if we ever read another, like, fighting book, we can bring somebody else on that, like, knows a little bit more. Maybe we can get
Yeah.
Red or I don't know,
I
somebody
don't
that
know, maybe
watches
if
this stuff
anybody
and knows
has
it
any book recommendation like, nonfiction from, like, any of those people too.
on, like, exploitation for, like, athletes.
Yeah,
That would be a good
yeah, because, like, the thing is too and then not even to mention, like, how many times in the news and stuff do you see that, like, famous football star kills family, beats wife. It's like,
yeah, that is strange, huh?
why does that happen? Let's start connecting some dots, guys. Come on, it's not that hard. 1 to 2, guys. 2 to 3.
Did we have anything else we wanted to say specifically about the book or any lines? We kinda
I
just
didn't highlight
rambled, and I
anything, I
think
read the
that's okay.
physical book, so
I don't think I did. I just thought it was all in all, a very beautifully written book. I think a lot of people will relate to many parts of it. Anybody that's reading it will find something to extract out of it and appreciate. I just wish like it was more character. Like that's like my biggest thing. I think if there would have been a little bit more focused, like central characters or something to like
and I
circle
think
back to it.
if you not are not a part of the Fable group, I think it saves our past discussions. Because if you click on this little, I don't know, it's a little clock, it's got the dispossessed on there, and you can click on it, and then you can go to all of our chats. So I know you
I
can't.
don't know if that's because we're moderators or because we have it,
I don't
to
know.
be honest.
Well, I'll have Evan check. I'm gonna have him check right now. Which y'all won't have an answer, but
Oh, you do have past discussions.
yeah. So I'm assuming that means you guys would be able to see our chat specifically if you have read this book and you're not a part of the book club and you want to see specifically what we said. I think you can't because I'm in a different book club and it's got all of these other books from their book club. So
Interesting.
I'm pretty sure you'd be able to go back and check our specific thoughts and things like that if you were not a part of the book club at the time of us reading it and you want to see what we thought. Obviously, we didn't chat. There's a lot of chapters in this book, so we didn't put everything in every chapter, but I do think we did have some pretty well-rounded discussions and some of the chats there. So you can definitely check those out where maybe we go, because I think in there we ended up talking more about like the characters and things like that rather than what we did on this podcast episode. So
Yeah, I was looking to see. I don't know who all has voted, but right now it's looking like the next book club read will probably be Eileen by Otessa Moshkav. I think that's how you say her name.
what? How
It
did you?
says in what are we reading next?
No, what did you call
Mosh
her?
Mosh Moshfeg? Mush?
I think it's Moshfeg.
I don't know. I can't.
Atesha
Whatever. That
Moshfeg.
one.
Yeah,
Which is kind of surprising. I don't know actually how many people have voted on it because
I
it doesn't tell
voted.
me on Fable. But
Well, me and
there's
Mariah
some other
voted.
good
So.
books. So it was between we want to do something that was like woman focused on here. I tried to
For
pick a
Women's
couple of
History
like
Month.
historical fiction, but then like some like magical realism and then one that was just a little bit different. So I picked I Who Have Never Known Men, The Women, Eileen, and A Council of Dolls. So if you're looking for some interesting books, all of those sound interesting or all of those seemed interesting to me and something that we could probably do as a book club. So maybe check those out if you're looking for something to read next month. But it's looking like
We're gonna be doing Eileen, maybe.
Eileen.
That's what it seems
Question:
like.
we got 19 hours.
Get your votes in now. I think by the time this is up, the
It
voting
might
will be
be.
over. Anyways, other than that, I don't think we have really anything else to say. Other than next month is a busy month for us over here at Literary Liberation. Expect an episode every week.
We're trying something new, and it's a
uh,
little daunting, but it's all leading up to the newest Hunger Games book. So we're gonna do the
so
Hunger Games trilogy,
will
A
be
Bout of
next
Songbirds and
episode.
Snakes, and then the what
Book
is it?
club.
Sunrise on the Reaping.
Yeah, yeah. So next episode will be the Hunger Games trilogy, which you can see right
Yeah.
there. So my book. So, which spoiler alert, compared to this, is a whole lot of nothing burger. Anyways,
It really does. So
so other than that, thank you and good night. Let me kick out Craig.